BP. Coming down now. Nursing is more than just a job. It involves caring for people at a time when they're the most vulnerable in their lives. When I was about 22, I went travelling to the UK and got myself some work as a nurse, mostly working in dialysis units. I was just at the start of my nursing career and I was really enjoying learning my chosen profession and becoming more skilled and competent. It was a Monday afternoon, about 1 o'clock, when I first started getting some symptoms. The first symptom I experienced was acute dizziness. I just felt like I couldn't stand up anymore. I actually decided to go home. My fever was getting higher and higher, so I probably wasn't thinking very clearly by the middle of the night. So even though I had started crawling to the kitchen on my hands and knees to get drinks and to the toilet, and I vaguely remember seeing a rash in the mirror on my face at one stage when I washed my hands, I really wasn't thinking clearly by that point. Aaron came home at 8 o'clock the next morning after his night shift. He was one of my flatmates and we'd just started a relationship only a couple of months before. He said that he tried to sit me up and I just blanked out. So he laid me back down again and called an ambulance. I don't think I would have lived for more than 2 or 3 hours because at that point I was covered in the rash. That meant that the blood had already started leaking out under my skin, and once that starts happening with meningococcal disease, it isn't long before you have organ damage, limb damage, and eventually death. One of my friends was an attending doctor in the ED that day, and he said that he left the room to get something from another room, and by the time he came back about 2 minutes later, my rash had spread. At that point in time when they called them, that I only had about a 5% chance of surviving. So they sedated me because at that point it was much better if I was asleep so they can work on me. They intubated me, which meant that a machine would breathe for me. They then started giving me antibiotics. It's amazing that something so simple can kill off such a deadly disease, but it's simply antibiotics. After 5 days, they made the decision to amputate my legs, but it really wasn't a decision because the damage that the bacteria had done to my legs, there was literally no blood supply getting to my legs for the 5 days, so my toes had all shriveled, and so they really had no choice but to amputate. So I remember the first few days of being on the ward as extremely painful. I mean, I couldn't move because after 16 days in ICU, all your muscles have started to atrophy and you're really not able to do much for yourself. And as well as that, I had the rash covering a lot of my body, so moving was an extremely painful affair anyway. And everyone was just so excited, and I remember feeling very anticlimactic, like this is not how I imagined my life. And I think getting into a wheelchair for the first time, it really hit home to me that I had in fact lost my legs. Although I wasn't really thinking very much about the future, I was very conscious of the fact that I may never be able to go back to clinical nursing. And I was really upset at that time about that idea because I'd only really just started my nursing career and I felt like it had all ended too soon. After 4 months in the Royal London Hospital, the doctors decided I was well enough to make the flight back to Perth. I'd only just started seeing Aaron, so he wasn't from Perth and not from Australia, he's from New Zealand. So it was a big decision for him to come back to Australia with me, a girl that he'd only known for a few months. Feeling better with that? Yeah, good. Have you tightened this a bit as well? The process of getting prosthetic legs was a difficult and long and repetitive one. The main reason was because of the skin grafts on my stumps. Took a long time to heal.
That my stumps are looking heaps better. Yeah. Oh, remember how bad this one was?
It was just a never-ending cycle. I'd get new legs, they wouldn't fit properly, of course. My stumps would change shape, I'd end up with blisters. The blisters would then ooze and then all the skin around them would get damaged.
Looking good overall though.
Yeah, no, that is better.
I found that the only way to deal with it was to come off my legs completely and spend 2 or 3 days in my wheelchair until the blister had healed, and then I would try all over again. And so when it got to a year, and then 2 years, and then 3 years, and I still wasn't walking, I began to become extremely frustrated that my life was never going to move on. A big reason for that was because I put everything on hold until I was walking. So I felt like I couldn't go travelling in a wheelchair, I couldn't work in a wheelchair, and I couldn't move on with my life. And so I started to feel extremely isolated and lonely in that first year. I didn't want to spend, especially because I was so young when I acquired my disability, I didn't want to spend the rest of my life in that place where I was angry at the rest of the world because of what had happened to me. I think there reached a point after a couple of years where I realised that I was never going to be not in a wheelchair because of the nature of my stumps and the difficulties I have with prosthetic limbs. I will always use a wheelchair on some level. I found that once I finally reached the point of acceptance, the world opened up a lot more, I made new friends, and I just moved on with my life, and my disability just became a non-issue. I got quite excited about the idea of going back to clinical nursing, but as time went on and my physical challenges with my prosthetics and my wheelchairs just became more and more affecting my daily life, I realised that it was unrealistic to try and go back to something that would cause me a lot of pain and frustration for the rest of my life. And I had to start seriously thinking about what else I would like to do, still within health, but not necessarily on the floor of a ward or a dialysis unit. And that's how my research career really started. Going back to work gave my life purpose again. It was good to be back in the hospital again. It's a huge labyrinth and I had my own little place within it, and I really enjoyed being back amongst all the people that I know and have worked with for many years.
Come and sit down, Liz.
And eventually I ended up managing the research office, and then when required I also see patients for clinical trials.
How long's it been since you've been since you've been? Oh, probably about 6 months.
Oh, that's good.
She doesn't look impressed.
I use my wheelchair mostly at home. It very rarely leaves the house unless we're going somewhere where I think it would be easier to not walk. And to be honest, it doesn't really make any difference to me anymore as long as I can do what I need to do to get things done. So it's now 10 years since my illness, and all the things that I thought I would no longer be able to do, I've been very surprised to see that I'm still doing. My life in fact is not markedly different to how it was before I caught meningococcal. I'm still working in nursing and I'm still travelling. Irene was born exactly 3 years after we got married, and the process of having a baby has been such a huge shock to our previously uninhibited lifestyle that now we're still considering whether we're going to have any more or not, but maybe we will. We still hope to continue travelling at some point in the future, but for the moment we're just enjoying being at home. I reflect on my experience with catching meningococcal disease and losing my legs as just one of those things that happens in life. I think that life happens to everybody and you can't control it, and sometimes it's just bad luck. Certainly there are things that are a lot harder to do or things that you have to do differently, but you derive the same amount of enjoyment out of life no matter what you are or what you look like or where you come from.